Kim Mathers, best known as Eminem's ex-wife, has lived a life filled with public drama, legal trouble, and personal battles. Her latest court appearance took a shocking turn when she collapsed after hearing her sentence. Kim's life has been a whirlwind of addiction, heartbreak, and redemption attempts. But what led to this dramatic moment in court? Let's dive into the details behind this courtroom shock. An October night that changed everything. In October 2015, Kim Mathers found herself in a life-altering situation. She was in Panama Township, Michigan, driving a black Cadillac Escalade that would soon roll into a ditch. Initially, local law enforcement pegged it as just another DUI case, but deeper details quickly emerged. Kim later admitted she had been drinking heavily, nearly a full bottle of rum, before getting behind the wheel. What made this crash especially agonizing to watch was her later statement that the accident was not just a drunk driving episode. She explained that it was a suicide attempt. This shifted the spotlight to her unaddressed depression, anxiety, and ongoing struggles that many people had whispered about for years but never fully understood. Some onlookers sent her messages of support, acknowledging she clearly needed a lifeline to get out of her downward spiral. Others showed little compassion, pointing out how serious it is to drive under the influence, no matter the reason. That crash also revived old suspicions. People began wondering if Kim's affiliation with Eminem would let her avoid major consequences, especially when initial records for her case were briefly sealed. Kim, however, pushed for transparency, unveiling not only the stark details of that night, but also her own vulnerability. She had been battling personal demons for a long time, yet it took a near-tragic crash for those struggles to receive serious attention. The October crash placed Kim at the center of a debate. Could her mental state justify a less severe penalty, or did the danger she caused to herself and the community require a strict response? In the end, it served as a turning point, forcing courts, reporters, and the public to look at her story with more than just moral judgment. She was not simply a reckless driver. She was a person overwhelmed by grief, loss, substance abuse, and heartbreak. That single harrowing night laid bare what years of tabloids had only partially captured: a woman in deep crisis, searching for a way out. Early life woes. Long before becoming a recognizable figure in tabloids, Kim Mathers, originally Kimberly Ann Scott, walked through a rocky childhood. She shared it with her twin sister Dawn in Warren, Michigan. Their home environment was so tense and erratic that running away felt like a logical plan. By age 13, both girls had fled, occasionally landing in youth shelters around Detroit. Some close to them remembered how they bounced from place to place, always hoping to find a sliver of stability. This difficult background collided with the restlessness of their teenage years. Kim was no stranger to dysfunctional situations, which might explain why she developed resilience mixed with a tendency to pick the wrong battles. Eventually, she met Marshall Mathers, who was also trying to keep himself afloat in a neighborhood stung by poverty. Like Kim, Marshall carried unresolved struggles from his own upbringing. These early years shaped Kim's worldview. She learned to rely on herself, but she also sought comfort in people who offered even the smallest sense of security. Maintaining healthy relationships would be a challenge, mainly because she had few stable role models. In short, her childhood experiences set the stage for the unpredictable life she would end up leading. Some repeated patterns emerged: brash decisions, urgent attempts at finding belonging, and a quiet longing for an ordinary life that always felt out of reach. By the time she was a teenager, she was already a survivor of emotional upheaval. That survival instinct took many forms in the long run: frequent moves, complicated relationships, and a habit of keeping feelings hidden until they boiled over. The dangerous cocktail of trauma and minimal emotional support would prove highly significant once she stepped into a relationship with a driven, sometimes aggressive young rapper who dreamed of success under the stage name Eminem. Meeting the future rap icon, Kim met Marshall Mathers when both were still teenagers. He was rapping for anyone who would listen, adopting comedic impressions of famous hip-hop artists, trying to capture some spark in a bleak environment. She lived with Marshall and his mother Debbie Nelson for a while, viewing them as an escape from her own issues at home. They were drawn together by a sense of shared struggle, forging a bond that alternated between passionate and volatile. Money was sparse then. Marshall was tapping into local rap scenes, hustling to be noticed. Kim was drifting around, grappling with her own traumas. Their romance deepened when they realized their emotional baggage was oddly complementary. She saw in him someone with a drive and creativity that gave hope. He saw in her someone who would stick by his side, no matter how rough the road got. Their relationship took on a teenage intensity, with intimate moments overshadowed by frequent fights about about finances, cheating rumors, or just the stress of daily survival. Despite the arguments, they welcomed a daughter, Haley Jade, in December 1995. The baby's arrival heightened the stakes of their relationship, giving them an extra reason to work through their challenges while also intensifying the pressure. Eminem's rap ascent soon started to pick up pace, which meant new opportunities, but also new strains on their fragile foundation. As Marshall's career advanced, Kim watched from the sidelines, sometimes proud, sometimes triggered by feelings of neglect. No matter how rocky it became, their bond remained central to Kim's identity. She saw him as a partner and father, while the outside world began recognizing him as a rising star who took raw emotions and turned them into rap lyrics. That formula would eventually propel Eminem to global fame, drawing Kim along with him into a swirl of cameras, headlines, and gossip that she wasn't prepared to handle. Shared battle with addiction. While outsiders zeroed in on drama and public outbursts, Kim and Eminem were each grappling with private demons. Both faced serious struggles with substance use. For Eminem, the path involved prescription pills and denial. He once described how one pill of a painkiller offered him an escape from constant stress, igniting a cycle of dependency that nearly took his life multiple times in the mid-2000s. Rehabilitation came with support from unlikely allies, and he eventually embraced a sober lifestyle, determined to avoid leaving his children without a father. Kim's addiction fights often played out more publicly. She faced multiple arrests that hinted at deeper patterns, including drug possession and attempts to obscure substances in police vehicles. Tabloids latched onto every misstep, yet her mental health issues remained largely unexplored. People noticed her repeated downward spirals, but rarely stopped to ask what fueled them. For a period, Kim and Eminem enabled each other's issues, with arguments sometimes fueled by substance use, jealousy, and regrets from scarred childhoods. Their toxic dynamic found its way into Eminem's music, which included violent or hostile references that kept fans in thrall while leaving Kim feeling humiliated. Critics of Eminem's lyrics pointed out how real people, Kim in particular, served as fodder for his stories of pain and anger. Meanwhile, fans argued that his honesty set him apart. This cycle of chaos and partial recovery continued for years, with each entering rehab at different times. Eminem found his footing first, though it took a near-fatal overdose for him to admit he had hit rock bottom. Kim's journey had fewer big announcements or official statements. It was more like scattered attempts at treatment, overshadowed by setbacks. Their shared battle with addiction showed they had more in common than just a tumultuous relationship, but they handled sobriety in uneven phases. Eventually, both recognized their need to address their issues not just for each other, but for the children who relied on them. The Shelby Township hearing. In November 2016, Kim Mathers stood before Judge Douglas Shepard in Shelby Township, awaiting sentencing for her 2015 DUI case. Many had predicted a prison term, but others anticipated that her mental struggles would be addressed. Prosecutors presented the facts. Kim drank excessively and drove, fully risking the possibility of injuring innocent people. Kim's defense attorney emphasized that she was in deep distress at the time, highlighting the psychological pain that led her to steer into that ditch. Judge Shepard acknowledged that Kim was no ordinary defendant. Reporters, fans, and critics were watching closely to see if her attachment to a famous ex-husband might skew justice in her favor. But the judge also recognized that Kim had taken steps to address her situation. She had enrolled in therapy, begun using SoberLink for random testing, and shown that she understood the gravity of her actions. The resulting sentence was measured: probation, fines, mandatory counseling, and substance testing multiple times a month. Kim had no choice but to comply if she wanted to avoid harsher consequences. The judge reaffirmed that she was being treated like any first-time DUI offender who had shown a willingness to enter sobriety and therapy. Opinions on the ruling were split. Skeptics labeled it as another example of celebrity justice, pointing out that high-profile individuals often escape severe punishment. Others applauded the judge's approach, relieved that mental health was considered. Regardless of public opinion, the court's decision forced Kim to remain on a short leash. She had to pass those drug and alcohol tests, continue her counseling sessions, and appear for updates when required. For some, it might have been a lighter path than incarceration. For Kim, it felt like yet another emotional mountain to climb. Life under the court's gaze. After the hearing, Kim's life became a cycle of mandated sobriety checks, monthly visits to her probation officer, and a watchful public that analyzed her every move. Whenever rumors surfaced about diluted test results, the same old debates sprang back to life. Was she trying to trick the system, or had the tests simply been inconclusive? Kim insisted she was doing her best to comply comply with everything, wanting more than ever to prove she was serious about staying on track. During this period, the media's judgment felt relentless. Blogs monitored her daily errands, newscasts framing any hiccup with a dose of drama. Meanwhile, she was still coping with depression and emotional trauma that had gone unaddressed for most of her life. Therapy sessions offered some guidance, but there was also the stress of pleasing a justice system that had limited tolerance for failure. Surprisingly, Eminem stayed in the background, not offering public commentary or turning her situation into lyrical content. Instead, he quietly focused on their children's well-being, stepping in when needed. Reports hinted that he offered financial assistance for extra therapy and medication, though specifics weren't made public. For observers used to Eminem's earlier approach, where personal feuds were often broadcast in songs, this radio silence was striking. Kim attempted to live a simpler life, selling a larger property for a smaller home. She spent more time around her children, trying to assure them that she was committed to positive change. Friends noted that she was calmer, no longer chasing after big nights out or risky situations. Even so, her history loomed over her. One slip, whether a failed test or a missed appointment, could send her right back into court. It was a tense balancing act, but one that Kim seemed willing to endure if it meant a chance at a stable future. A tangle of love and music. The larger public discourse about Kim Mathers is forever linked to Eminem's discography. Since their early romance, she had been a subject in his music, sometimes painted sympathetically, but more often cast in disturbing narratives of betrayal or heartbreak. Tracks that spelled out violent fantasies skewed public opinion, leading fans to see Kim as the problematic partner who had pushed the artist to extremes. This perspective weighed heavily on her, especially when the songs were performed live or widely broadcast. Yet behind the savage lyrics was a relationship between two people who had endured trauma and lacked healthy conflict resolution skills. Kim and Eminem had attempted marriage twice, divorcing twice in the process. Affairs, jealousy, heated arguments, and substance-fueled meltdowns all contributed to a never-ending loop of pain. In one sense, their late 90s and early 2000s conflicts were legendary in entertainment news. In another sense, they reflected the normal meltdown two wounded individuals experience when neither knows how to keep themselves afloat. By the mid-2000s teens, they had turned a corner, shifting from fiery fights to a quieter co-parenting routine. Eminem took in not just Haley Jade, but also Kim's daughter Whitney and niece Elena, providing a stable home. Kim reciprocated by acknowledging the support whenever her personal troubles flared. They rarely appeared in public together, but when they did, it showed that, at the very least, they could stand civilly side by side. Her side of the story. After years of being portrayed through tabloids and rap lyrics, Kim Mathers eventually tried to give her own perspective in select interviews. Though she rarely spoke out extensively, she went into detail about feeling humiliated when Eminem used their most intense personal fights in his music. Seeing blow-up dolls and stage performances that mimicked her life felt like repeated betrayals, especially when crowds cheered for the spectacle. While fans often pegged her as a villain, she believed her side was rarely heard. She discussed how both she and Eminem had been unfaithful at points, how each had inflicted pain on the other. Her mention of loneliness gave insight into the emotional toll of her partner's hectic tour schedules and the sudden shift of power once he became world famous. She described instances where she felt overshadowed by his star power, expected to adapt without acknowledgement of her own feelings. At times, she admitted wrongdoing, acknowledging that she made poor decisions that contributed to destructive cycles. That willingness to own up to her part in the drama painted a fuller picture than what fans of Eminem's music may have believed. It wasn't a neat narrative. Each side had made mistakes, enabling or tolerating harmful behavior before lashing out. She also credited Eminem for stepping in during her darkest hours, such as taking care of the children while she sought treatment. By no means did she present him as a flawless guardian, but she did highlight how he had shown real compassion when she was truly at rock bottom. Her candor eventually shifted public perception. Commentators who once dismissed her as an attention-seeking troublemaker started acknowledging she was a real person with complicated motivations, shaped by trauma and heartbreak. Still, she could never completely control the narrative. Even as she tried to stand on her own, the media continued to frame her primarily as Eminem's ex-wife, overshadowing any individual identity.
Canal connects the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, allowing ships to avoid sailing around the tip of South America. 40% of all U.S. container traffic passes through it.
These massive cargo ships carry everything from consumer electronics to raw materials. But the longer they're stuck out here in the Pacific Ocean, the later they arrive in ports up and down the U.S. coast.
110 years after its construction, the Panama Canal, the world's largest canal, has suddenly dried up. This amazing work of engineering magnificence, constructed through Central America for over 40 years by the concerted effort of over 40,000 workers, might soon be no more. With frequent reports of water shortages in the Panama region, the fate of the Panama Canal hangs in the balance. This could mean a disruption in global trade and a massive decline in Panama's vast economy, mainly built around canal revenue. Is this the end of an era for the Panama Canal? Can the Panama Canal be saved from this speculated doom? Join us as we learn about the current state of Panama Canal and the real reason it's quickly drying up. Popularly referred to as the crossroads of the world, the Panama Canal is an engineering marvel that has, for over a century, served as a pivotal shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Before its completion, ships had to navigate the treacherous Cape Horn, daring tumultuous storms and adding significant time to their journeys. With the canal in place, maritime routes were shortened dramatically, revolutionizing global trade. However, in a revelation that has astounded the world, the Panama Canal, an engineering marvel and a lifeline for global trade, is facing an unprecedented water crisis and is at the brink of drying up. What could be the cause of this alarming water depletion in one of the world's most crucial waterways? There's more to the cause of this crisis, but first, let's get into the history of the Panama Canal and what it means to the world.
This is the Panama Canal. It's 100 years old. These are the original gates, the original locks.
Especially for maritime trade. This artificial waterway, translated in Spanish as Canal de Panama, is a man-made 82-kilometer sea path in Panama built to connect the Atlantic Ocean with the Pacific Ocean, cutting across the Isthmus of Panama and serving as a route for maritime trade. The canal is engineered with locks at each end to lift ships to Gatun Lake, an artificial freshwater lake 26 meters above sea level, created by storing water from the Chagres River and Lake Alajuela in Panama. The canal is one of the largest and most difficult engineering projects ever undertaken. The first attempt to carve something of this sort through the narrow land bridge of Panama began in 1881. Colombia, which controlled the land then, permitted a French company called the Comp Universel du Canal Interos to build a canal. This company was led by Ferdinand de Lesseps, who had recently achieved great success building a similar canal in Egypt called the Suez Canal. But the Panama Canal was set to prove how daunting a task it was to dig through mountains. Inspired by his past accomplishment, Ferdinand de Lesseps set out to build a sea-level canal in Panama. An impossible attempt according to another engineer, Adolphe Gaudin de Lépinay, who, having studied the Panama land closely, proposed that building dams at two locations, Gatun and Miraflores, to create large lakes that would be filled with water and be connected using locks to raise and lower ships between the different water levels to connect them to the oceans. His plan eventually became the blueprint for the Panama Canal and established him as a visionary engineer, but that was after Lesseps's failure. The French company, unfortunately, ignored Adolphe's advice and embarked on a doomed venture with their initial vision, leading to massive loss of lives and resources.
It was an amazing feat of engineering. It was designed by the French, finished by the Americans, and 20,000 workers died of malaria and yellow fever constructing this.
By an act of mischief, Lesseps kept the investment and supply of workers flowing long after it was obvious that the targets were not being met until the entire money ran out. The French company went bankrupt in 1889 after reportedly spending $287 million and losing an estimated 22,000 men to disease and accidents, wasting the savings of 800,000 investors. Work was suspended on May 15th, and those deemed responsible were prosecuted in the ensuing scandal, known as the Panama Affair. Lesseps and his son Charles were found guilty of misappropriating funds and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. This sentence was later overturned, and Lesseps, at age 88, was never imprisoned. In 1894, another French company, the Compagnie Nouvelle du Canal de Panama, took over the project. This company, in a bid to be better, maintained a minimal workforce and tried to keep the project afloat while actively looking for a buyer. Philippe Varilla, the French manager of the new Panama Canal Company, eventually persuaded Lesseps that a lock and lake canal was more realistic than a sea-level canal, and so a blueprint was designed to achieve the lock model proposed. By Providence in 1902, the U.S., having indicated interest in constructing the Panama Canal, passed the Spooner Act that allowed the purchase and usage of materials belonging to Compagnie Nouvelle du Canal de Panama for building the canal. This was a glimmer of hope for Panama, but they had to complete a negotiation as a condition for construction. The negotiations faced a back and forth, stalling the project's progress. Sensing an opportunity, Panama, with the support of the United States, declared independence from Colombia in November 1903. The United States swiftly recognized Panama's newly claimed independence and entered into negotiations with Panama for the Panama Canal. This gave birth to the Varilla Treaty, signed in February 1904, which fulfilled the requirements set out in the Spooner Act and established a special zone known as the Panama Canal Zone, where the United States would have control over the canal. In 1904, the United States began work on the canal in earnest. They adopted the proposed French design, and rather than dig through the mountains, they decided to build a canal with locks, which would be cheaper and avoid potential problems caused by differences in sea levels on either side. However, there were still challenges to overcome. The construction project was an expensive endeavor requiring a large workforce. For this new attempt, 40,000 skilled and unskilled people working tirelessly through harsh conditions made the sacrifice. Most of the workers were laborers from the West Indies, while the engineers, administrators, and skilled workers primarily came from the United States, working against all odds and revolutionizing engineering to build the greatest artificial canal in history. One of the most significant innovations of the engineers was the use of steam shovels and giant excavators to dig through the Caliber Cut, later renamed Gillard Cut, in honor of David Deal Gillard, the American engineer who supervised its construction until he died in 1913. Making the Caliber Cut was one of the most challenging aspects of the entire project. The team encountered unstable soil and frequent landslides that tragically claimed numerous lives. Persistent landslides continued for years, dumping millions of cubic yards of material into canal excavations and creating significant setbacks. But the workers were dogged and determined, fighting hard against every mishap, laboring under scorching temperatures, and employing various earth-moving tools to excavate 73 million cubic meters of earth and rock. Even though they did not know, these workers were etching their names in the sands of time, building a path for the world. Their relentless effort finally paid off, and the canal was opened on August 5, 1914.
In 10 years, more than 50,000 men and women built a structure of colossal dimensions. On August 15, 1914, the Panama Canal was inaugurated.
After almost 3 decades of relentless engineering to construct the Panama Canal and the amount of resources involved in this project, it becomes important to ask, since its conception, how has the world benefited from daring to undertake the building of this shortcut? And what has been the impact of the Panama Canal on international commerce? Since its beginning in 1914, the revolutionary Panama Canal has acted as a catalyst and regulator for international trade, increasing the rate at which delivery happens via ship and regulating the international trade atmosphere. The number of ships passing through the canal often reflects the overall health of the world economy, with increased activity signifying a boom and reduced activity signifying a recession. According to statistical data provided by the ACP, around 40% of U.S.-bound cargoes pass through either Los Angeles or Long Beach, while 60% of the traffic transiting the Panama Canal begins or ends its journey at a U.S. port. The competition between ports on the U.S. East and West coasts continues. The Panama Canal has seen a rise in annual cargo traffic from approximately 1,000 vessels transiting commercial traffic to 12,386 ocean-going vessels in 2015, and down to 11,688 ocean-going vessels transiting in 2016. Impressive figures until 2015, right? So what happened in 2016? The drop in fiscal year 2016 was attributed to the many challenges faced by the Panama Canal. Among them was the delay in the opening date of the new Neo-Panamax locks. Utilization levels also decreased due to market conditions, specifically in the USA, with low import volumes and high business inventory levels. Drought restrictions caused by the El Niño weather phenomenon from April until June also prevented vessels from transiting at their full capacity. The dropping in transit is seen largely attributed to the use of DST from the west coast of North America by the major ocean carriers deploying the post-Panamax vessels, particularly the super-large container vessel, which cannot traverse the Panama Canal due to the width constraint of the locks on the Asia-North American trade route. The Panama Canal Universal Measurement System tonnage was 326.8 million a year before 2014, an increase of 1.9% from fiscal year 2013. The total cargo through the Panama Canal registered 222.4 million long tons, an 8.6% increase over the previous year. Before the new waterway expansion, only 3% of the world's trade was transported through the canal annually, with 68% originating or ending up in the USA. With fiscal year figures dropping since 2016, do you think the world needs to pay closer attention to the Panama Canal? Should we be scared for the fate of the Panama Canal? Yes, the world needs to pay closer attention to the Panama Canal. Yes, we should be scared of its fate. This leads to the big question. What is happening to the Panama Canal? And why is the world's largest canal under threat of a drought? Each trip through the Panama Canal requires a staggering 52 million gallons of fresh water. This water raises and lowers ships as they travel through the different water level sections. This water is sourced from the artificial lakes Alajuela and Miraflores. These lakes rely on rainfall to maintain their levels. Most of this rainwater eventually flows back into the ocean, creating a unique challenge in managing the needs of the Cancanaler vessel navigation with the needs of the people for access to clean water. Since the same water sources that give water to the canal also provide drinking water for over half of Panama's population, around 4.3 million people, deciding which function takes precedence becomes challenging. Nature has maintained this balance for the last 100 years since its construction. Panama is known as one of the wettest countries in the world, supplying both needs simultaneously. The canal and its surrounding lakes have always received ample rainfall to keep them running. However, in 2023, things took a turn for the worse. A combination of two factors caused a significant drop in water levels, particularly in Gatun Lake. The first was a general decrease in rainfall, creating a deficit compared to usual levels. The second factor was the El Niño weather phenomenon.
The canal is going through its driest spell in more than a century as El Niño brings higher temperatures and less rain. The drought is squeezing global supply chains, and that could mean higher prices and less choice for consumers just in time for the holidays.
This phenomenon occurs every few years and is characterized by warmer ocean temperatures that disrupt atmospheric circulation patterns. In Panama and other tropical countries, this disruption weakens or displaces winds that are supposed to bring rainfall, reducing available rainfall. This is a crisis for the Panama Canal that heavily depends on water for functionality. The Panama Canal is now facing a new challenge of managing its water consumption well enough to keep trade going while ensuring that there is enough water to meet the needs of its people. The seemingly increased demand for water caused by reduced rainfall has put a strain on Gatun Lake, which currently faces a daily water deficit of 3 billion liters. So, yes, the Panama Canal is in a crisis. Gatun Lake is losing more water than it is gaining, and this situation has become so critical that the water level in Gatun Lake has dropped to near its lowest point ever recorded, even during the rainy season. These historically low levels have forced the Panama Canal Authority to reduce daily traffic in the canal from 36 to 24 vessels and limit the allowable draft size. These limitations are affecting energy product carriers, container vessels, and ships transporting grain from the United States. For 2024, water levels in March and April at Gatun Lake are projected to be lower than at the start of the year, at only 80 feet in March and 79 feet in April. What would happen to the world? if this canal dries up. Imagine waking up one day to realize that Panama Canal, the world's largest canal, has suddenly dried up. For a shipping route that controls almost 3% of world maritime trading activities, 46% of America's export and import activities, and generates over $246 billion annually in revenue, the extinction of the Panama Canal will have a drastic impact on the world's economic activities. Do you think this can be averted? How? The Panama Canal water crisis has again turned the world's attention to the complex, self-balancing, and interconnected nature of our planet's systems. While rainfall is the immediate culprit of this looming disaster, rainfall scientists have pointed out a seemingly ignored factor greatly impacting the fate of the Panama Canal: deforestation, especially in the Amazon. Warming ocean temperatures and dry conditions have undoubtedly affected the canal. Still, a more ominous issue has been consistently ignored. The deforestation of the Amazon and the driest rainy season on record seen in 2023 are raising doubts about the viability of a human-made waterway that was a marvel of engineering when constructed a century ago. It is a known fact that the Panama Canal is highly dependent on rainfall volume. The Amazon rainforest, on the other hand, produces rainfall, generating a self-sustaining cycle that moderates the regional and global climate, as all tropical forests do. Because it is the largest rainforest in the world, the Amazon is often referred to as the planet's air conditioning system. However, as discussed in a climate policy brief in 2019, the Amazon rainforest is much more than a conglomeration of trees that offer cool temperatures to the world. The forest removes carbon from the air and stores it underground, keeping it from rising into the atmosphere. To continue this vital function, the rainforest needs to be preserved. But the menace of deforestation is its biggest enemy. Deforestation can bring the rainforest to a point where it can no longer produce the rain needed to survive. Growing evidence shows that parts of the Amazon release more carbon into the atmosphere than they can capture. That produces two effects. First, more trees die off because of lack of rain, diminishing the rainforest and contributing to more intense and prolonged droughts, such as the one seen in 2023. Second, as more carbon is released into the atmosphere, local and regional rain cycle areas are affected. A drier climate in the Amazon consequently affects thousands of miles to the north and the south of the Amazon. There is evidence that the Amazon's hydrological engine is beginning to fail, exposing the Americas and the rest of the world to catastrophic damage. In 2023, the Amazon experienced its worst drought in recorded history, which scientists attributed to El Niño in Panama, and more broadly to climate change and deforestation. El Niño has grown increasingly severe in recent years because of climate change, which contributes to worsening climate and forest loss. Thus, climate change, deforestation, and the warming of Pacific Ocean waters and their consequences are all intertwined in a vicious circle. What does this mean for the world? Contrary to some public perceptions and assertions, Panama cannot resolve the canal's problems by pumping seawater into Gatun Lake, the Central American nation's main drinking water source. Channeling rivers of clean water can also not be an option, because that action is likely to result in an environmental impact that could damage an entire indigenous community that depends on the river for survival. Since climate change and deforestation go hand in gloves, the future of the Panama Canal seems bleak. This means a great reduction in global trade, especially U.S. exports and imports, and increased shipping costs because of taking longer routes. Is it true that the world might soon come face to face with the headline, "Panama Canal, the world's largest canal, which has suddenly dried up"? Is there a solution? As noted, there is only saving the Panama Canal with addressing climate change and the deforestation of the Amazon. Some South American countries that play host to the rainforest harboring the rainforest have embarked on individual initiatives to reduce forest loss. But greater coordination among them is desperately needed. Every other nation should not be left out in this fight to reclaim the Amazon and every other tropical rainforest and preserve the Panama Canal. Panamanian authorities have proposed a solution to increase the supply of fresh water in the canal, allowing them to avoid future crises. A potential project involves the construction of a multi-purpose reservoir on the Indio River. The Indio River is outside the canal's watershed, so its construction would require government approval. Based on information on the authorities' website, authorities have already conducted pre-construction studies on the potential reservoir. This will be a long-term project, but it will be worth the while. According to the Panama Canal spokesperson, the project will improve the use and reliability of water from Gatun Lake, the water body through which the canal runs. Can the Panama Canal be saved?
Now let's also now tell you how the traffic jam in Panama Canal has caused commodities prices to rise.
The construction of the Panama Canal stands as one of the most audacious engineering feats of the 20th century, spanning over 50 miles to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, forever altering global trade routes. However, a tragic twist of fate has befallen the Panama Canal, as it has abruptly dried up. What led to the sudden depletion of the canal's water? And what implications does this hold for the region and the world? Join us as we delve into the details of the Panama Canal and explore the consequences of its unexpected drying up. The Panama Canal is the largest in the world, connecting two continents. This architectural marvel is considered one of the world's wonders, as it serves as an extraordinary waterway, seamlessly joining the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans remarkably. It goes beyond being a simple canal, which is crucial in facilitating international trade by connecting more than 140 maritime paths. The primary purpose of the canal is to save time and enhance shipping efficiency. Picture enormous ships navigating through the narrow locks with remarkable precision. It displays the incredible intellectual capacity and engineering expertise of humanity. However, in a tragic twist of fate, the Panama Canal has unexpectedly dried up, impacting its surrounding regions and the entire world. Before delving into the cause of this sudden drought, let's take a brief look at the history of the Panama Canal. Several people had been talking about building a canal as early as 1534, and even Thomas Jefferson suggested it back in 1788. At first, France took a shot at building the canal in 1881, but by 1894, they had to call it quits because it was a total failure. But in the 1800s, the American and British governments had a brilliant idea. They figured out a fast and affordable way to transport goods between the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. So they went for it and started building the Panama Canal. But the canal was not just about easy transportation. The United States saw it as a strategic move to gain global business and military power dominance. They knew that controlling the flow of ships would give them a ton of control over the vast oceans. The Panama Canal cuts right through Panama, separating North and South America. It's not long, only about 77 kilometers, and it sits pretty low, just 26 meters above sea level at Gatun Lake.